All right, hi. I hope everyone had a nice 4th of July weekend. This is session three's lecture, and today we're going to look at, um, in session three, we will be looking at chapters 5 and 6, which deal with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act, and their impact on schools. And um, I intentionally skipped over chapter 4, which was the actual Individuals with Disabilities Education Act chapter. We'll come right back to that in session 4. The reason for that is because the majority of our time in this course will be spent with addressing the issues of IDEA. And so these two other federal laws, I felt like I wanted to kind of not just get them out of the way, but talk about them a bit. One, because Section 504 is used pretty heavily in schools. At least I used it pretty heavily in my schools. And then secondly, but in a different way than IDEA. And Americans with Disabilities has a different kind of bend in the way it addresses or impacts what's happening in schools. So it's a little bit different. So we will, I've got a fair amount of information in chapter 5, not a lot in chapter 6. We'll try to gallop through those things and be on our way, and then start some discussion about, in particular, around Section 504. All right, so without further ado, let's jump over to chapter 5 and section 504. And the things that I want to talk about in this chapter was packed with information, and I encourage you to reread and to relook. And I'm only hitting the things that I wanted to touch on in this, but there's a lot more information. This could have been 3 sessions in and of itself. Let alone just being a portion of a session with another chapter. So really dive through that chapter. I think the text did a really nice job of providing a lot of strong and good information. So we're going to look at the background, talk about who's protected by Section 504, the ways in which schools are obligated to protect provide protections from discrimination. 504 does have a definition of FAPE, free and appropriate public education, that we need to discuss. And then this idea of development of a 504 plan and what that looks like and those kinds of things. So those are the things we're going to hit in this chapter. So the background is, I thought the historical background of the Rehabilitation Act, and in particular Section 504, was really interesting in the fact that, it originally there was an attempt to try to get this to be a part of the Civil Rights Act in 64. There was a strong effort in 72, but failed because of budgetary constraints and Nixon vetoes. And then finally, it is enacted in 73, but it's a rocky start, and it has a very slow implementation. We see, remember from our discussion about the law, that Congress creates statutory law, and then the executive branch is charged with creating regulatory law. And the regulatory law for Section 504 and for the Rehabilitation Act was very, very slow in coming. And, it's curious to think about what kind of legacy that slowness to respond to individuals with disabilities has in the way in which individuals with disabilities view their status within our schools, within our country. So, that's, I think, an important piece of the background and history. But ultimately, the function is to eliminate discrimination and exclusion solely based on a person's disability. So it's limited to entities that receive federal funding, but most all public schools, the fastest way for a public school to receive federal funding most likely is going to be through federal lunch program, as well as Title I. So anytime, and then implementation of special education law automatically puts public schools into there. So that is who's ultimately responsible for 504. So there's really not many public schools that are outside the realm of needing to eliminate discrimination and exclusionary practices. All right, so who is protected? There's three parts to the definition of who's protected. The first part is any person who has a physical or mental disability, and this is really straightforward. If a person is identified as having a disability, physical or mental, they are a protected group under Section 504. We cannot discriminate against them. But Part 2 and Part 3 of the definition are a little interesting, a little tricky. So Part 2 is a person that has had a record of being disabled. And, the example was that student that had all sorts of maybe some mental health issues that manifested in behavior disorders, and then through, whether that's through medication or through therapy, that disability is dissipated and no longer really manifests itself, but the school might still act in ways that are exclusionary to that because the student had discipline problems. They don't let the student go on field trips. Well, that's a violation of Section 504 because we're assuming that we're excluding them because of this past disability that they had. And then Part 3 is the person is regarded as having such a disability, right? Meaning that we just think they have one, and so we act in exclusionary ways, and we can't do that either. And again, the example in the book was that there's a concern that a student may have a communicable disease, and so we exclude them from the lunchroom. That's a discriminatory act, and we can't just arbitrarily do that. There's processes that need to occur on that. So, but also it's important to note that the person must be otherwise qualified. So again, here, disabled student tries out for the basketball team, has the skill level to make the basketball team, but is cut because of their disability. That's a violation of Section 504 because they are otherwise qualified. They are the 8th best basketball player in the school. They would have made a 10-man roster, but because of their Tourette's syndrome or whatever other disability may be present, they were excluded from the team. That's a violation of 504. Disabled kid tries out for the basketball team, 10-man roster, is the 20th best player in the school. They are cut from the team because their ability to play basketball. That is not a violation of 504, right? So they weren't otherwise qualified, and so they are not being discriminated against. Next, another example would be that idea of the student being excluded from the honors English class because the honors English teacher doesn't want them there because of their disability, or because they're special, because they have extended time on test or whatever else it is. That would be a violation, but the student that hasn't met the prerequisites for admission into the honors English class, that would not be a violation. So protections against discrimination, the chapter outlines some areas. There needs to be physical accessibility as well as program accessibility. So again, we can't eliminate the opportunity for a student to be a part because of physically not being able to participate or have access. And then also that program accessibility, which again is kind of like that honors English example previously. The school's required to make reasonable accommodations, and the court have said that these should not be of undue financial burden, because this is not unlike IDEA, 504 does not have, it's a civil rights law, not a funding law. So this is about the school's required to make accommodations, but those shouldn't be required to build all brand new facilities or to create completely new programming for those students. Those would not be reasonable accommodations. And then schools need to make sure that they're doing things to be avoiding the discrimination, right? So we need to, for example, physical accessibility. We need to be installing, you know, wheelchair accessible doors or motorized doors or those kinds of things. All right, so FAPE inside 504. Education-related services must be provided to the students at no cost. That's the free part, but appropriate in 504 is this notion of equalize. So if students have if non-disabled students have access to the stage, disabled students need to also have access to the stage. That's that physical accessibility. If non-disabled students are able to participate in advanced placement courses, disabled students that are otherwise qualified need to be able to participate in advanced placement courses. So it's that equalization kind of notion is the FAPE definition for 504. And there is a 504 plan that needs to be written. So this is a written plan outlining how the school will address the needs of the students, and it's much less formal than the IEP from IDEA. So this is there should be a format and a form that your schools and school districts use, but it's much less cumbersome, I think, than the 50 than the IEP plans that we would see with special education law. All right, so let's look briefly at Chapter 6 and ADA. I've got about 3 more minutes left before I'm out of time. So American with Disabilities Act, we're going to look at the background and then how schools are impacted. Really just a couple of things to note in this chapter. Again, a lot of information in the chapter. I would recommend that you look through that and understand that. But this is another civil rights law passed in 1990, and it broadens the federal protections of individuals with disabilities. So the Rehabilitation Act in Section 504 required those protections to be provided to within entities that receive federal funding. ADA was a much broader definition and really widens that protection. But the fact of the matter is that ADA does not extend additional relief to students with disabilities beyond IDEA or 504. But where it does is extend additional relief and consideration is within employment practices and also this architectural access. This was ADA was what really prompted and really brought forward a lot of notions about sidewalk cuts that are more handicap accessible, ramps into entrances that are much more accessible. All of these types of architectural pieces were things that we saw a lot of coming forward. Again, IDEA and 504 provided student desks that were accessible, but those wouldn't necessarily have provided teacher desks that were accessible, or notions around ensuring we weren't discriminating against applicants that were wheelchair bound for hiring them into particular positions. And so ADA really, its impact on schools was much greater towards the employment side. All right, so that's really all I wanted to say on that. Again, a lot of information there. I look forward to the discussion. In next session, we'll start jumping into the special education law itself, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So that concludes session 3, and we will see you in the next session.